Good evening, all of you. Let me welcome you all on behalf of Asha and Ganga Jamni Heritage. Today is the World Heritage Day, in fact, the International Day for Monuments and Sites. India is home to 38 UNESCO World Heritage Sites out of the 1,121 such spots identified around the world. So far, only China, Italy, Spain, Germany, and France have more locations on the list than India. The day is dedicated to recognizing sites of historical importance, raising awareness regarding them, and stressing the need to restore and preserve them. The day thus promotes cultural importance while also highlighting the many impediments in doing so. The UNESCO website explains this year's theme as complex pasts, diverse futures. The history of a place can involve many points of view. The conservation of cultural heritage requires careful examination of the past and its practical demands provision for the future. In recent years, debates on certain narratives and particular stories over others have come to the forefront. Addressing difficult and often contested histories involves complex conversations with different stakeholders, avoiding biased views and interpretations of the past. Acknowledging global calls for greater inclusion and recognition of diversity, this day invites all of us to reflect on, interpret, and review existing narratives. However, today we have a different theme to discuss. Writings on the history of early modern Rajasthan, parochial or refreshing. And, and to talk on this topic, we have with us Dr. Mayank Kumar. Dr. Kumar completed is Associate Professor of History at Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. Till very recent past, he was at JNU. His research interests pertain to exploration of human nature relationships in the early modern times. Dr. Kumar completed his MPhil by examining Hindi literature of 16th and 17th century India to point out the complex intricacies of caste system, a unique character of Indian societies. Later, he argued as his doctoral thesis at JNU that the ecology is defined and redefined by a mutual and continuous interface amid the complex webs of interactions among the physical, religious, socio-cultural, and politico-economic settings. Along with several articles published in reputed journals, Dr. Kumar has a monograph, Monsoon Ecologies, Irrigation, Agriculture, and Settlement Patterns in Rajasthan during the pre-colonial period, which was published in 2013 by Manohar. He has also co-edited two volumes on history of Rajasthan. The first being Revisiting the History of Medieval Rajasthan, Essays for Professor Dilbagh Singh, which was edited by him along with Suraj Bhan Bhardwaj, R.P. Bahugna. It was published in 2017. The second monograph, which he co-edited, was reconfiguring The Historical Landscape of Rajasthan, essays for Professor G.S.L. Deora, which he did along with Surat Bhan Bhardwaj, R.P. Bahugna, and Sangeeta Sharma. It has just been published in 2021. He was associated with Decision Center for Desert City, Arizona State University as Fulbright Fellow to work on climate change and water issues through an interdisciplinary approach. He was a fellow at Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, New Delhi, to examine the issues associated with social stratification and politics of natural resources management. After that, he availed UGC National Research Fellowship to explore Humans and Natural World, a study in social perceptions, interactions, and responses in the 17th and 18th century Rajasthan. He is visiting faculty at Department of Environmental Studies, Delhi University, and Shiv Nadar University at Greater Noida in Uttar Pradesh. Please welcome Dr. Kumar. Over to you, Mayank.
शुक्रिया नदीम साहब। सबसे पहले तो मैं जो आपका पर्सनल लॉस आज है उसके बारे में हैट्स ऑफ टू यू कि उसके बाद भी आप आज प्रोग्राम होस्ट कर रहे हैं। मतलब आई मस्ट शेयर कि नदीम साहब के बड़े भाई का इंतकाल हुआ है सुबह, और फिर भी उन्होंने अपने मतलब जो एकेडमिक कमिटमेंट है उससे नहीं चूक रहे हैं। सर प्लीज़ अपना सबका ध्यान रखिए, और इस क्या कहूँ, अल्लाह आपको ताकत दे को बर्दाश्त करने की। एंड लेट मी ऑल्सो एक्सटेंड द सेम आर्गुमेंट कि जो हालात आज दिल्ली और हिंदुस्तान में हैं, this is not the best time to speak, this is not the best time to discuss things like this, but since we have committed long before, so I will continue and taking inspiration from नदीम साहब कि नहीं, अपना जो एकेडमिक और प्रोफेशनल कमिटमेंट है उसको हमें निभाना चाहिए। One more thing before I formally venture into my theme. This is a general survey. My intention was to discuss the kind of historical writings are available for early modern Rajasthan, especially because the kind of documentation we have available for this region, that is immense, and that is fortunately being explored extensively. So as a general reader, we need to go beyond what is being discussed in Rajasthan in terms of only Rajputs and Rajputs and Rajputs. There is much more to Rajput in early modern times. The second thing which I must share, क्योंकि गंगा जमुनी तहजीब की बात हो रही है तो मैं अपनी भाषा को दोनों के बीच में रखूंगा, अंग्रेजी भी चलती रहेगी और हिंदी भी आती रहेगी। एंड द लास्ट थिंग, दिस टॉक इज डेफिनेटली नॉट फॉर द स्पेशलिस्ट, वो पर्पस यहाँ पर नहीं है। यहाँ मेरा लार्जर पर्पस ये था कि हम लोग डिस्कस करें कि इन व्हाट वेज हिस्ट्री हैज डेवलप्ड एंड इन व्हाट वेज इट इज enriching our understanding of past, the complexities, the simple narratives, the binaries in which we are living today has to be challenged, has to be revisited. Only then perhaps we'll be able to understand the complexities of present times. And the history of Rajasthan gives us tremendous insights to the past and the way societies have been functioning. So the specialists who have joined, please excuse me if I at times generalize things and at times I don't focus on the specificities. One more thing, I will be citing few scholars. That does not mean there are not others who have worked on the theme. Just because of the paucity of time and because of focus of my own this presentation, there will be scholars who might be missed out in my presentation, so they must also excuse me. I'm not undermining their contribution. I'm simply focusing on certain aspects of historical history of early modern times, and we'll be examining those in terms of what is the necessity or in what ways we must visit our past. Please allow me to share my screen, PowerPoint, so that I can discuss the things with you and the names will become much more visible to you. Next slide, please. The most important things, Shagufta, I believe I can do that. So let me try that. If I can share the next slide. Right. My intention at the moment is to, first of all, argue that we are dealing with the pre-printing press era, and that is very important for us to realize. Working in a pre-printing press era has its own complexities, has its own ways of understanding past. The most important thing which we must realize, when we make a copy in a printing press era, we can make multiple copies of a similar script, similar manuscript. But when we are working with the pre-printing press era, then the copies have to be made once again by rewriting the whole manuscript. In the process, there are errors, there are mistakes, and at times there are corrections. So it becomes very difficult for us to understand what is the real intention, because if there's a modification in the text in the second rendition or the second copy, so as a historian we are working with those changes also. And in the absence of a very corroborative evidence, we at times find it difficult to accept which is the correct one, or what was the real intention of the author. Is it corrected in the supervision of the author, or it is corrected by the, or changed by the copy maker? So as a historian we work with those contradictions or with those limitations when we are dealing with the sources. The other thing which is important for us to realize when we are dealing with the early modern Rajasthan, we have extensively been able to edit the books and publish it. There are lot many books have been published, especially by the Rajasthan Oriental Research Institute. It has done extensively commendable job. But the editors who are working with the manuscripts, the original manuscripts, they have done tremendous job. Narayan Singh Bhati, Hukum Singh Bhati, and they have been very meticulous in their approach. So we must give due credit to those who have laid the foundation for us to examine the rich, extremely rich literary traditions. I must also say that at present time, Rajasthan Oriental Research Institute is not getting enough grant, and are short of experts who can help in editing the volumes and publishing it. Because once they are published, it becomes very easy for the scholars sitting across the globe to work on those scripts. Though there is a project is going on where the manuscripts are being digitalized, they are made available in digital form. But once we have the edited volume, a printed version, it becomes easy for us to read that and study that. So we must give due credit to those editors who have worked extensively and given us the a large corpus of published records. Along with those published records, we have a very rich literary traditions which is yet to be published, which is available in the manuscript forms. So historians who are keen to work on, or the scholars who want to work on the literature or literary history of the languages, they get tremendous insight from the literary tradition which is available in Rajasthan. One of the reasons for the preservation or conservation of these manuscripts is that the princely estates gave extensive patronage. The rich Jain community, the merchant communities gave extensive patronage so that these literary manuscripts or these literary works have survived over a period of time. So those who are interested in working on early modern times, they have multiple kinds of sources, literary traditions, published and non-published in forms of manuscripts. Then we have a very rich archival tradition. Princely states of Rajasthan, they have a very rich archival tradition where they have documented, kept records of day-to-day revenue administration, day-to-day police administration. Various kind of bahis are maintained, various kinds of revenue records are maintained. I will be discussing them. Along with that, we also have a very strong painting tradition in Rajasthan. And though I'm not very conversant with the printing traditions of Rajasthan, but it need to be mentioned that there is a very long and very rich painting tradition in Rajasthan. I will be briefly touching upon that, but I will not be able to share more details because I'm not very comfortable with that. Apart from these, we have a very rich archaeological evidences for this period from Rajasthan. There are public works, there are palaces, there are havelis, and there are religious monuments. All these provides us an avenue or a place through which we can weave a very complex understanding of historical past. The simple one-to-one narratives of a dynasty or a family tradition or a political history, was earlier practiced, but now we are going much beyond that, and I will be discussing the processes of that. In the same vein, let me move further to give you a example of, we have a Khyat tradition. Khyat is from the Khyati. Khyati matlab glory or your glorious past. So Khyats are the historical traditions of Rajasthan which have been documented. Vat in a way is a bath, the bath tradition. A particular incident is recorded. A particular event has been recorded. So we have extensive bath tradition available in Rajasthan, and which are being used extensively by the recent scholarship. Then we have Vaishnavalis of the famous sons also, and these Vaishnavalis are available in for the Jain tradition and for the Nathpanthis, and for example, the Chhattis Vaishnav ki Varta, the Vaishnavalis are available in those forms also. And there are very rich Santik tradition, Sant tradition in Rajasthan, and we have a lot of peers, and the history of those are also available through Vaishnavalis. We also have Kavya, the literary traditions, where various forms of calves are being worked. One of the calf traditions which I will be discussing is the Padmini, because that is most contested one, and we'll be examining that. Along with that, we must not ignore the Persian historical traditions. Though it is primarily Mughal centric, but we have a very strong Persian historical traditions. At times, history is being written in the center, that is the Mughal center, but they reflect on the history of Rajasthan. So there's a long historical tradition in that sense also, which is available in Persian. I must confess, most of the scholars who are working on early modern Rajasthan are not very comfortable with the Persian historical traditions. We have primarily focused on the literature available in the vernacular, the documents available in the vernacular, but we are trying to bridge that gap through edited volumes or through collaborative works, so that the Persian historical traditions can also be brought into the larger understanding of early modern times of Rajasthan. Moving further, we have a administrative documentation, as I mentioned earlier. We have Marwar Pargana Vigat. This is something like Abul Fazl's Ain Akbari. The kind of documentation of the whole Marwar Pargana is available in the Vigat, is very, very helpful, especially the way I have worked or the kind of work I have done. The Vigat has been very, very important. It's a Pargana-wise, village-wise record of various things. What is the revenue? What is the nature of crop production? What are the water management systems? How many wells are there? How many wells have become dry? What is the process through which they are being reactivated? The communities are living in those villages. What is the composition of those communities? Which is the dominant community? So all this documentation has been done in the Vigat. So Vigat has been very important. This is late 17th century document for basically Marwar region. Marwar is modern day Jodhpur area. We have Arsattas for Amer region, primarily for Amer region. Arsatta is from the Arsat. Arsat is 68. Means in Hindi it is 68. Arsat. And the 68 kinds of documents or the information has been collected, which are available Pargana wise for Amer region. Amer is modern day Jaipur area. And one of the documents which I have extensively used from the Arsattas is Hasil Faroi. Hasil Faroi is the kind of penalties which have been imposed. So we have the document through which various kind of penalties, by examining those penalties or the crime, we are able to study the nature of crime which is being happening. In what ways those crimes have been negotiated by the state. So we have a very good source to understand the nature of crime and the punishment process at the village level. We have Vakil reports. Vakils were the representative of the princely state at the Mughal Empire, and they were reporting constantly back to the Rajput rulers what is to be done, what is going on in the Mughal Empire. So the way I was arguing about the rich Persian tradition to understand the Mughal Rajput traditions, similarly Vakil reports are the other way around. The representative of the ruler sitting in the Mughal Empire is reporting back to the ruler what is happening, what should he do, where should he proceed, where should he focus. So these kind of records gives us a two-way communication between the ruler and what is going at the center of the Mughal Empire. We also have Archdash. Archdash is written by Pargana level official to the ruler at the princely state, and the rulers is Archdash. A request is being made. various kinds of activities are reported, various kinds of directives are sought. What should we do? An example of that can be, which I have been extensively using, is that हुजूर इस इलाके के अंदर बारिश बहुत कम हुई है, अब तो मोठ ही उगानी पड़ेगी, which means now since there is monsoon, there is rain, but the rain is delayed, so we cannot grow for the conventional crop. We have to go for a crop which has a very short gestation period, like moat. So these kind of documents help us, the agrarian production system as well, the way common man was negotiating with the vulnerabilities of climate, vulnerabilities of monsoon. So those are very important documents to examine the understanding of the village level agrarian production system, and in what ways rulers at the center were modifying their revenue policies or modifying their approach to extract revenue, are can be deciphered by examining these documents. We also have Dastur Kamwar. These are the kind of rituals are described, how to honor someone when somebody visits the ruler, how to honor the person. So there are extensive kind of documentation, not only revenue but the social documentation, because when Dastur Kamwar you examine, then what is the status of the various communities, what is the caste systems functioning in the at the village level or at the state level. These kind of understanding of the complex understanding of society is also visible through Dastur Kamwar. So unlike focus solely on economic history, unlike focus solely on agrarian history or the revenue history, we have documents from this region which gives us glimpse of the complexities of social structure and social functioning. Moving beyond these documents from the Amer region, we have Sanat Parwana Bahis for Jodhpur region, we have Kagat Bahis for the Bikaner region, and we have Hakikat Bahi for the primarily for the Jodhpur region. These documents are very important for us to understand the complex functioning of a state itself. I must mention here the way I was arguing that it is a pre-printing press era. We need to realize that though they are written with the Devanagari, in the Devanagari script, but there is a minor difference in language of Marwar, language of Mewar, language of Amir, language of Kota Bundi. So which means historians has to work on the variations of the script, variation of the language, even within a province like Rajasthan, which we treat as a one administrative unit. But those who are working with the primary documents, they realize that the Sanat Parwana Bahi are of a very different, written in a very different manner. Kagat Bahis are complex. I'm not very comfortable with the reading Kagat Bahis. Professor Devla has worked extensively with the Kagat Bahis. Hakikat Bahis are being used by Professor Bahuguna. Bahuguna ji is using these Hakikat Bahis, and other scholars have also used these Bahis. So there's a it's not only focused solely on the revenue administration. There's much beyond through these documents which we can decipher. In terms of painting, let me briefly mention that we have Udaipur tradition, we have Kishangarh tradition, we have Kota Bundi tradition, and we also have Amer collection. Apart from the other uses to understand the functioning of the state patronage, or the symbolism, or the rituals which are visible in the paintings, we have Baramasi paintings where various seasons are described. Along with that, we have the dohas on along that. When I conclude, the last slide will give you a glimpse of what I'm trying to suggest, that there are dohas or the couplets written on the painting, which is primarily representative of the Baramasi tradition. Apart from that, I will not be going into the details, but one can always refer the work of Dev Bhanu Singh Chawla and his classic text in the Times, The End of a Trail, History of Cheetah in India. He has extensively used paintings available from the Rajput region from the Rajasthan region to examine the way Mughal Empire and the princely states of that era were negotiating with the wildlife. In what ways hunting is taking place? What was the negotiation with the flora and fauna? So paintings have been used by environmental historians extensively. I will not be further detailed discussing it because I have not worked on the paintings. Let me briefly touch upon the public works. We have dams and embankments. We have sarais. Mirta ki sarai badi mashhoor thi. While doing my research, I used to stay at one of the sarai in front of Dargah Ajmer. It used to offer us a very cheap accommodation, so I used to stay there when we were in our basic research studies. We have Johras, one of the method of water management system. We have step wells, and then we also have evidence of Shikarga. So there's rich archaeological evidence available for this period. Nadeem Saab is hosting this talk. Aligarh has taken extensive lead in documentation of archaeological evidences. The Bhai Khan, Ikhtar Alam Khan Sahab, Ravin Kumar Sahab, Rajiv Sharma ji, unfortunately he is no more with us, Nadeem Sahab Khud, Jibrail, all of them have worked extensively on the archaeological evidences available for the period. And then they have weaved it with the historical literary traditions and the revenue administration. In what ways they have been used these dams and embankments, these sarais, how they were functioning, and what was the social implications of that have been extensively examined. So for this period, we have painting tradition, we have archaeological evidences, we have literary evidence, we have administrative evidence. So we have a gamut of evidences for us available, and then we started working on the historical traditions or examining these sources to offer a nuanced history of the early modern times. I must also mention, though I mentioned it, forgot it, the temple traditions, especially the Ranchod Nathdwara temple of Udaipur, the creation of whole Jaipur city is research have been done on the establishment of Jaipur city. Jodhpur, we have the twin city, Jodhpur and Mandor. Bikaner, the Lalgarh Palace. So there is a ample archaeological evidence which is to be explored. There are art historians who are working on the issues. I have not worked on that, so I will not be touching on this. But anybody who's interested on the archaeology or architecture, they have plenty of evidence available from Rajasthan to examine these sources. Before moving further to the modern historiography, let me highlight one important influence on the later traditions of history writing. That is the demand of the colonial subjugation. And now I will be venturing into something controversial or debatable, but the way Mughals and Rajputs were colliding, or they were helping each other, or they were working in tandem with each other, the same tradition was continued in the colonial subjugation. What I'm also trying to argue by contrasting the colonial period with the Mughal period is that we need to make a distinction between the colonial power and the indigenous power. There are narrations where Mughal power is unfortunately termed as a foreign power. We need to challenge that. No, it's not the foreign power. They were part and parcel of larger Indian historical tradition. Unlike the Britishers, who are colonial administrator, and their orientation, their focus was something very different. The kind of exploitation which colonial rulers were doing was never seen in the Mughal Empire. I'm not saying the empire or the administrative structure was not exploitative. It was exploitative, but they were living here and they were using the resources extracted from this region were used within India, unlike the colonial power. And the way colonial powers have subjugated us, not only in terms of resource exploitation, but also our psyche and mentality, especially when we examine the overemphasis of Rajput tradition in Rajasthan in the contemporary times. We need to realize that the way Colonel James Todd wrote the history of Rajasthan, and especially focusing on Rajputs, has shaped a history writing tradition in Rajasthan. That tradition, which I'm calling as a parochial, where they focus on the superiority of one community, one caste, one particular group, without understanding that the Rajputs constitutes only 15% of population of Rajasthan. There are other communities, and we tend to ignore their past because it is the colonial legacy. The way James Todd wrote, and the way ideologically they were using or they were cultivating relations with the Rajput community, so that their rule is strengthened, their rule is further consolidated. So there's a long tradition of that lineage which needs to be challenged, and fortunately modern historians have challenged that. In the same vein, Let me highlight James Todd examined Puranas, and on the basis of Puranas, he has created a long lineage for the Rajputs, which have been extensively challenged by works like Bidya Chattopadhyay's and also by Nandini Sinha Kapoor. But we must be very careful while using indigenous traditions like Veer Vinod and Jaisalmeri Khyat. Both these traditions are primarily following the way Britishers were writing history of their region. So Veer Vinod and Jaisalmeri Khyat both are written in the second half of the 19th century, reflecting back on the history of the Mewar or the history of Jaisalmer. We need to realize that it is written during the colonial period and greatly influenced by the colonial historical tradition. In the same way, I am also referring on the Mardum Shumari. Mardum Shumari census, which was done for the Marwar region in Mardum Shumari Raj Marwar, the second half of the 19th century. It's like a census which was done under the British administrative empire, and the Rajput rulers were borrowing it. So what I'm trying to suggest you, that the Rajput rulers, for their survival, for their strength, or for their consolidation of their own rule against the sharing of power with the larger kin group, they initially depended on the Mughals, later on they depended on the colonial power. So we need to examine the complexities of historical documentations available with us for understanding of early modern times. The initial history writing traditions primarily focused on political history, as we all know. It was focused on the political history and the dynastic histories, the glorious past, as if there was no other community, as if there is no social history, and we should not blame them. That was the larger ethos of the history writing traditions of that era. But and along with that, the local history of Velos. Uh, Perhaps it was in response to the colonial domination, where India was shown that you don't have any history, you don't have a glorious past. Perhaps to counter that, even in the Rajput traditions, they were writing history where glorious past was being examined. The inner contradictions of societies, the complexities of the societies, the exploitative nature of societies was never discussed. Perhaps in response to the challenges which they were facing from the colonial history writing traditions, where India was being described as a very backward society, static society with no change at the local level. So perhaps these historians were trying to respond to that. But I must say that we must understand that they were also under the influence of colonial history writing traditions, where political history was the dominant mode of history writing. Now we move towards the modern historians, how they have moved beyond the political history or the history of the past in terms of glorious past or the glorification of the past. Major tradition came from the agrarian history, primarily through the exploration of archival records, archival revenue records, archival administrative records. Historians like Nurul Hassan, Professor Satish Chandra, Professor S.P. Gupta, Dilbagh Singh Sahab, my own supervisor, Dilbagh Sahab, G.S.L. Devla, all of them have extensively worked with the primary archival documents. It's not very easy work. It's just a very complex work, especially because you don't get a chronology of records. You don't get a series of the records. For certain Pargana, you get record for certain year. For other Pargana, you get record for another year, and then you have to weave history of through that. It was a painstaking work which they did sitting in the archives without any AC, without any support of the modern amenities, without the photocopy machine, without the modern day cameras. They were sitting together, making copies of the documents and then examining it. It was a painstaking work which they did. And they laid the foundation on which the later generation of the historians have worked very comfortably. So the way I was trying to suggest that there were editors who have given us the published manuscripts or the published works, edited works from the Rajasthan Oriental Institute. Similarly, these agrarian historians were sitting in the archives, working with each and every document, making notes of that, making sense of that, and then constructing a larger history of the revenue administration. What is important for us to understand, that the Mughal history was further enriched by understanding given provided by the history of Rajasthan. Give me a second. What we had from the Mughal history, the larger revenue administrative system, but how it was functioning, that was not visible to us. These writers made it visible to us. I often use a term: the nature is visibly invisible. The nature is visibly invisible. It's so pervasive, it's so visible that we tend to not write about it. What they were doing, they were making nature visible. They were making the complexities of agriculture production visible to all of us. It was not easy. They were understanding the basic agrarian production system, the vulnerabilities of it, the complexities of it. Let me highlight that a bit for you. Whenever we say that the revenue administration was decided by the Mughals, that is a 40% will be collected, what we tend to forget that because of the crop rotation, because of the cropping of the agrarian system, it was not always uniform availability of agrarian production made available to the calculator or to the revenue administrator. Every year, the same field will change the nature of production. One year, if they go wheat, the other year they will be going the pulses. So the availability will change, and accordingly, the conversion based on the Ane Desala has to be changed. So it's a very complex functioning. Not entire field of a villa of a peasant is cultivated throughout the year or regularly. They rotating the crops, they were rotating the fields. So these have to be documented from each season, and accordingly revenue has to be calculated. So the complexities of that became visible by the historians working on the agrarian history of Rajasthan. The other dimension, which is very important for us to realize, that they were able to understand the caste system, in what ways caste function in the revenue administration, how the caste considerations played important role in the revenue extraction. They were riayati peasant. Riayat means concession. Because of your caste, certain concessions were given. Concessions were given on your land, but if you're cultivating on somebody else's land, despite you being from upper caste, you will not get the concession. So the nuances of that becomes visible by these historians. They were working on the on almost on each and every crop and each and every field. Through that, we were able to get a very complex understanding of the agrarian history. It's not that the India is very good at the agriculture production. There were vulnerabilities. Let me give you one more example of that, in what ways these complexities were visible. One village will get a good rainfall, and the neighboring village might not get the good rainfall. So the nature of production will change. The kind of concession or the kind of rebate which state has to give to the person which has not received enough rain at a appropriate time, that has to be calculated, that has to be calibrated, and then the revenue demand has to be raised. Similarly, mere measurement of land is not sufficient. At what moment of time, which crop has been grown, that that is important for us to realize. Along with that, what kind of water is being provided? Is it rain fed? It's a natural rain, or they are deploying extra effort by extracting water through rahat or through the irrigation devices. If they are investing extra, so what is the implication of that on the agrarian taxation system? These complexities become visible when we examine the writings of scholars like Nurul Hasan, Satish Chandra Sahab, S.P. Gupta Sahab, Dilbag Sahab, Jisal Devra Sahab. Devra Sahab has worked on Bikaner region. Dilbag Sahab has worked on Eastern Rajasthan, like S.P. Gupta Sahab, but their period is different. And the complexities of agrarian system and the social structure became further visible when we examine the works of a scholar like Surajban Bharadwaj, Madhvi Bajekal, Shiv Kumar Bhanot, Narayan Singh Rao. Narayan Singh Rao has worked on Kota region. Surajban Bharadwaj has worked on the Alwar region. Madhvi Bajekal has worked for the Eastern Rajasthan. And all of them have closely examined these revenue documents and deciphered the character of agrarian production. It's not the revenue administration. It is the agriculture production and its complexities which were being examined by these scholars. So those later scholars who have worked on environmental history, they get a lot of support by examining these published records or these published works, because Madhvi Vajikal very closely examines in what ways intercropping was being practiced. You saw two or more crops simultaneously, with the anticipation that if there is a monsoon failure, one crop may not survive, but other, the hardy crop, will survive. So these negotiations at the village level, at the agri production level, becomes visible when you examine these revenue records and try to decipher the functioning of the agrarian production system. I'm terming it agrarian history because we tend to ignore, relate it with the revenue administration. Yes, revenue administration is part of that, or rather, revenue administration has given us insight to the functioning of the agriculture production system. So scholars like this have examined the complexities of that. We also need to examine or understand or appreciate that the functioning of monsoon in Amer region or Jaipur region is different, and the functioning of monsoon in Jodhpur region is different. The functioning of monsoon or the rains in the Kota is different, not because the rain, the amount of rain they receive is different, but also because the kind of landscape they have differs, the kind of soil they have, it differs, the kind of geological formation they have, it differs. So the complexities of those region specific rain productions become visible if we examine the works of scholars like Dayan Singh Rao, Bhanosa, Madhvi Bajekal, or Surajvan Bharadwaj. The other thing which is important for us to realize, and I will be briefly mentioning that later on also, we cannot ignore the presence or the importance of, let me go. We should not ignore the importance of the pastoral communities and the trading activities in the sustenance of these princely states. The scholars like B.L. Gupta, B.L. Bhadani Sahab is from the same Aligarh school. Bhadani Sahab has worked on the trade relations. He has worked on the pastoral communities. In what ways pastoral communities were very important for the sustenance of agrarian production. It's an agro-pastoral economy. It's not purely agrarian economy. So the complexities of agro-pastoralism becomes visible if you give emphasis or if you understand the close relationship between the pastoral communities and the agrarian communities. Let me give you an example of that. I have used that in one of my in the book, also in one of article also. There's a dispute which is coming to the ruler in Marwar region, in the Jodhpur region. The complaint is that traditionally these pastoral group used to come and stay on my field. This year they are staying on the neighbor's field. They should be asked to come back and stay on my field, because once they stay on my field with their cows and with their goats, my field gets the nourishment, my field gets the fertilizer. If they stay on the somebody else's field, they will get the benefit. So disputes like that becomes visible to us. Another example of that, which is available from the historical records, is that traditionally I have been collecting cow dung from this village. The cows who are roaming around in the streets of the village, I have the right of collecting the cow dung. This time he has collected it. He should be banned from doing this, because as a tradition, I have been using that. What I'm trying to tell you or argue at the moment is that, please understand the importance on even on the cow dung in a forest, in an area where wood is not easily available in the Marwar region or the towards the greater and the little Thar desert. The wood is not easily available. So the cow dung becomes very important component or important fuel for the household sustenance. So that is being contested. So we cannot ignore, we should not ignore the importance of the pastoral communities in the larger sustenance of the agrarian communities. So these interrelations have been examined by scholars like Bhadani Sahab, B.L. Gupta Sahab, and the Mamta. She has worked on the functioning of the trading communities She was a scholar of Professor Dilbag Singh, has not published extensively. One of the article is carried by us in our volume in which we have dedicated to Professor Dilbag Singh. She's a scholar of commerce, and Dilbag Singh asked her to work on the history of commerce in Rajasthan of this period. So there is a complex understanding of the economy, trade, pastoral communities, and agriculture, which have been used by these scholars to offer us a very nuanced history of the region for this period. Before moving further, let me once again highlight the way archaeological evidences have been examined. I have already mentioned the work of Iqbal Khan, Rajiv Sharma ji, Ravindra Kumar, Nadeem Saab, and Jibril sir. What they have done, they have examined the agrarian, the irrigation system. The Kharin system has been documented extensively by Nadeem Saab himself. And there was a whole team in Aligarh who used to go to the field and examine the structure. Rajiv Sharma ji have examined the Karorpati Tanka of Amir, and in what ways the rainwater was channelized in the cistern in the large Tanka at Jagar Fort near Amir. Similarly, Ravindra Kumar examined various dams along with Iqbal Alam Khan. So the history of dam making is also visible to us. It's not the archaeology which is examined by them. What they have been examining, the statecraft. In what ways state was investing or encouraging the irrigation system so that the revenue can be ensured, so that the continuous agriculture production can be ensured. So it's not the archaeology which is examined. That is why I'm saying that the complexities of the evidences available for this period have been very beautifully examined by scholars to give us the process through which statecraft is ensuring the construction of dams. Through construction of dams, they were ensuring the irrigation of a larger part of the which is not irrigated. Satish Chandra Sahab has documented for 17th century Rajasthan that there is a gradual shift from single crop a year to double crop a year, which means the agrarian production is increasing. That increased agriculture production is reflected in the patronage which is being offered by the state to the literary work, to the painting work, which is available for this period from this region. So the enhancement in investment in the water irrigation devices, irrigation system, further enhances the state's capacity to patronize the literary traditions as well as the painting traditions. There is a whole workshop in Amir region for the paintings made available in that region. So the complexities of archaeological evidences with the statecraft and with the literary tradition and with the painting tradition is to be examined. We cannot solely focus on archaeology and the functioning of irrigation devices. There's a larger history of it. In what ways enhanced agriculture production further changes the complexities of availability of surplus with the state and how that surplus is being used. So there is a larger complex history which we need to examine and which is being examined by the scholars like this. The other traditions, which is important when we examine the history of early modern times and the modern historians who have worked on, is the process of state formation. It's not that the dynasties were the divine rulers. The way these dynasties were established, the complexities of that have been examined by scholars like Norman Ziegler, B.D. Chattopadhyay, G.D. Sharma, Inayat Ali Zaidi Sahab, and R.P. Rana. Why I'm stressing them is to make you or to argue that or to discuss that the lineage which is being claimed in the various traditions is not all that great. And the way state formation is taking place can be easily documented by examining the literature available for this period. Norman Ziegler has very closely examined the way the karma trade was exploited or was looted or was the horses were captured by the rulers and then they established their empire. In what ways? From a petty landlord, they are emerging as a big empire or as a big state. The process through which they are controlling or they are enhancing or they are expanding becomes visible if you examine the B.D. Chattopadhyay. The whole a genealogy with which James Todd has created for the Rajputs was challenged by British Upadhyay. And he has very carefully argued that we need to go beyond the prescriptive literature, beyond the court chronicles, to examine the lineage of these states and the complexities. And these scholars have also made it very important for us to realize that though now they are settled in their respective state, like Jodhpur or Mewar or Amer, but they were not originally from that area. They have come from somewhere else, from a rather they were migrants, and their migration is also being documented by them. I have not mentioned here, but somewhere later I will be mentioning that Nandini Sinha Kapoor has also documented that. In what ways state has emerged in these regions. So the complexities of state formation, without primarily focusing on the revenue administration, without primarily focusing on the the apparatus of a state, the process of state formation has been examined. G.D. Sharma, Zaidi Sahab, and R.P. Rana, they have examined in collaboration with the revenue administration in what ways revenue administration has been used in the state formation. Rather, I'll suggest that I need to highlight at the moment or stress at the moment is that Ziegler, British Upadhyay, and Nandini Sinha Kapoor, they have examined, they have critically engaged with the genealogies available for these states. The later scholars, G.D. Sharma, Inayat and Zaidi Sahab, and R.P. Rana, they have argued that from the kinship-based structure, from the structure where they were living with each other, sharing power with their kin group, now they are gradually converting them as a ruler. And the relationship is changed from brotherhood to Naukar and Chakar. Means they are the ruler, the dynasty is emerging as a ruler, and the feudal lords are emerging as a servant of the Chakar. So that shift or the consolidation of power in a particular dynasty is very closely examined by G.D. Sharma, Inayat Ali Zaidi, and R.P. Rana. So the complexities of state formation is not a state, it's not static, it has evolved. That the process of evolution has been very closely examined by scholars. The other thing which we need to realize that the modern scholars have not confined themselves or have not hesitated in challenging the formations of the earlier scholars. They have further refined it. They have highlighted that there is a fluidity, there is a change in the state formation process, there is a change in the state formation, and that needs to be examined. Which means, though one dynasty is ruling, but there are changes in the state formation, there is changes in the administration, there is changes in the social composition, social relations between the ruler and the feudal lords. So that complexity is being examined in terms of state formation. Moving further, because I have only suppose 15 minutes available with me, the communities have been examined. When I say communities, what I'm trying to suggest is that these documents gives us glimpses of the way communities were approaching the state, and by those evidences, we are in a process. We are in a position to examine the interrelationship of the communities. Dilbagh Singh, in his classic article "Regulating the Domestic," has very clearly examined. Though these are archival documents, these are revenue administration, these are the documents of penalties. What Dilbagh Singh has been able to very beautifully do is that the state's intervention at the family level, the social relations of a family are being governed by or being managed by the state. In what way the state intervenes in the primary functioning of the family is documented by Dilbagh Singh. This challenges the entire narration of the colonial administration of the colonial power, that the state was sitting somewhere else and the local rural communities were self-dependent and self-sufficient. Documents from this region and the works like scholars like Dilbagh Singh, Nandita Sai have argued that no, the state was actively participating in the functioning of that. Another article by Dilbagh Singh is very important when he examines the role of Mahajans. What is important for me to highlight in this moment of time is that state imposed a restriction that if there is a famine continuously for 3 years, then the money lender will not be allowed to claim the interest and the capital, which means the state was aware that unless the peasantry is here, they will not get the agrarian production. So the importance of various communities are examined. In the same article, Dilbag Singh also examined the role of Mahajans in the terms that state used to stand as a guarantee that if the crop fails and the money which is lended by the money lender is not recovered, then state stands as a surety. State will pay it back to the money lender, which means the importance of the peasantry and the importance of money lenders both have been understood, and the complexities are being examined on the basis of these documents. Moving further, if we examine the work of Nandita Sahai, unfortunately, she left us very early. She went very early. The politics of patronage. The title of her work is the politics of patronage. Apart from her work on the gender studies that we'll discuss later on, in the politics of patronage, she has examined the artisanal communities. In what ways artisanal communities and state were negotiating their spaces, how these communities were interacting with each other. Though the primary documents available for understanding of them is the revenue administration, but by examining the contestations, by examining the complaints, by examining the disputes, we have been able to examine when and where the state intervenes, when and where the state says that jo wajibi ho wo kijo, whatever has been the tradition, do that. Which means we need to understand the power relations. At times, a state is forced to intervene. At times, a state chooses not to intervene and gives it back to the local communities to negotiate among themselves by saying that jo wajibi ho wo kijiye, which means we will not interfere in that. So these complexities of social relations become visible. They are not watertight compartments. They overlap over each other, and that overlap is further makes the study of this period more complicated. Unlike contemporary understanding of past, where very neat narratives are offered, these scholars have argued that the neat narratives in terms of communities is not available. Communities were contesting with each other. At times they were seeking help of the state. At times they were negotiating it socially. The panchayats were functioning. It's not that they always panchayat was the sole arbitrator. At times the state intervened. So the complexities of the traditional understanding of societies is challenged by scholars like these, Dilbag Singh, Nandita Sahai, Suraj Bharadwaj. Suraj Bharadwaj, by examining the history of mayors of Alwar region, mayors of Mewat region, what he has said that in what ways these migrant communities were gradually converted into peasant. The peasantization of the Mayo community has been documented by Suraj Bharadwaj. What he's trying to argue that with the expansion of Mughal Empire and with the consolidation of Rajput principalities, we find a process of greater peasantization. Greater peasantization where state is intervening in enhancing the agricultural production of that area. Generally we tend to blame the Britishers for this, but we need to realize that there is a long history of expansion of agriculture. What Niladni Bhattacharya has argued, the great agrarian conquest during the British period, we need to realize that the process had started much earlier. The expansion of agriculture, the way agriculture was being expanded, and the marginal communities who were not agrarian, were gradually converted into peasant, and that peasantization has been very clearly and very beautifully documented by a scholar like Suraj Bharadwaj. I must also mention the work of Tanuja Kotial. I take privilege in stating that Suraj Bharadwaj ji, Tanuja, and myself, we three are students of Professor Dilbag Singh. We have been groomed by Dilbag Singh to examine these processes of historical understanding. Tanuja has examined the nomadic communities. In what ways the history of nomadic communities is very important for us to understand, especially in an area which is not agriculturally very settled. The area between Marwar, Jaisalmer, and Sindh, that bordering area, how to understand the history of that. Tanuja examines that in terms of nomadic narrative. That is the title of her work, Nomadic Narratives. The nomads In what ways those nomads were very integral part of the larger agrarian society, though they were on the margins, but they were important component of the larger agrarian society. The way Bharani Sahib has argued for the pastoral communities, here Tanuja has argued with the nomadic communities who were carrying the trade, who were transporters of salt, who were transporters of various communities, and they were also sorry, I have spelled wrongly Kotiya's spelling. It says Kothi होना चाहिए था, KOY लिख दिया है. So what she has examined is that the nomadic communities were also trying to imitate the larger agrarian pattern, yet they were maintaining their own independent structure also. In the series, last but not the least, Tripti Dev, she's arguing the history of Charans. In what ways Charans are important communities, and what is the relationship of the Charans with the larger state formation? What is the role of Charans in history writing traditions? She is yet to publish her monograph, but she has recently submitted her dissertation on the history of the Charan communities. That is an important contribution, because through examination of Charans, we will be in a position to examine the larger tradition of history writing processes in this region. I have already discussed the economy and trade. Let me move to other important consideration of the state, society, and gender. These scholars like Shashi Devla, Kailash Rani, Priyanka Khanna, Gitanjali Tyagi, what they have been doing is examining another invisible part of the larger Rajput history, the gender components. And what we need to realize that there are not only the queens and princes. There's a very complex history of gender. There's very complex history of gender for this period available to us. If I cite the work of Kailash Rani, she is a student of Sunita Zaidi Saab of Jamia Millia Islamia. Kailash Rani has argued and has examined the tradition of in the time of distress, the families used to leave their children, leave their women folk with the wealthy sections of society who are staying back in the village. They left their son, they left their children, they left their daughters, they left their wives with the larger family. And in what ways? Later on, they were being reclaimed, which means the whole understanding that there is a caste distinction. Though caste distinction is there, yet there is a local resilience, local system through which the larger population is retained. In the time of distress, the men folk is migrating, and the female folk is staying with the wealthy sections of the society. Along with that, Shashi Devla and Kailash Rani both have examined the whole process of widow remarriage in the area. Traditionally, we tend to examine that the Rajput societies don't practice the widow remarriage, but at the lower levels or the non-Rajput communities, non-Brahmanic and non-Rajput communities, they extensively practice a widow remarriage, and there's a reason for that. The most important natural resources or the energy resource was humans, so there was a premium on the reproductive capacity of the females. So it was always contested. The documents very clearly tell us that there is a whole tradition of bride price. During marriage, bride price was being offered to the father of the daughter. If she gets widowed, so who will get the bride price when she is remarried? The father-in-law or the father? So there are contestation on that. At times, the contestation reached the state. At times, the victim or the lady herself is approaching the state. So, giving us evidence that even the females of the Rajput community of the Rajasthan area had the opportunity they had the opportunity to reach to the state for the redressal of their grievances. So, the complexities of the gender and the layered understanding of gender becomes visible when we examine the work of scholars like Shashi Devla and Kailash Rani. Priyanka Khanna and Gitanjali Tyagi, they have worked on a different aspects of the gender. The concubines, Priyanka very clearly examines the role of concubine, the position and role of concubines. In what ways, where concubines were being placed in the larger court structure in the larger social structure. The famous concubine of Jodhpur region is the Gulab Bai. She was so powerful that she has constructed the whole tank in her name. So the complexities of the gender and its relationship with the state, its relationship with the society are being examined solely on the basis of these documents available for this region. We have the personal letters which Priyanka has worked upon to examine the relationship or the complex position of the concubines in the larger social setup. So there are scholars who are working on the nuances of gender, and fortunately, the complexities of the social process of this period becomes visible in through the lens of the gender as well. Uh, the importance of religion has also not been ignored. The importance of rituals have also not been ignored. In what ways? We see a transition from the larger Shaivite tradition to a Vaishnav tradition has been documented by scholars like Norbert Peabody, Monica Horstman, R.P. Bahuguna, and later on Mayurakshi is working on something different. I'll examine that. But let me briefly mention that the way these principalities were devising the means through which legitimize their rule. Religion played very important role. Rituals played very important role. At times they were imitating the Mughal Empire. The Mughal Emperor, the rituals Mughal Emperor used to practice. The same rituals are being followed, or similar rituals are being followed at the princely states as well. So the way religion or the larger scientific tradition visible or present in this whole area is being appropriated to further strengthen one's dynastic rule is also documented by scholars like Norbert Peabody, Monica Horstman, R.P. Bahuguna. What they are also trying to tell us that the segregation between state and religion in terms of state rules is visible, but state was gradually appropriating sanctity through religion to further strengthen their rule. Another important thing which becomes visible by the works of these scholars is that a kind of larger Vaishnav tradition of ideal kingship is also being used to further justify or further legitimize one's own rule. Which means, in what ways the larger Vaishnav tradition has an imagination of ideal society is being borrowed by these principalities, and they were trying to imitate that. But as I have been examining, I have been discussing that there are examination of communities. So those communities were not dictated in terms of religious prescriptions or the religious rules. Rather, the complexities or the local traditions were given primacy. So there is a multi-layered, multi-textured negotiation with the religion. Religion is being used to legitimize one's rule, but it is not being implemented at the community level. Communities are negotiating with the state on a very different platform. So that complexity one need to understand that it's definitely not theocracy. It's a different kind of negotiation with the religion, and the whole temple making activity is also important in that tradition. The scholars are working on that. Evidences of temple, religion, and the state formation are being examined to understand the complex relationship between state, religion, and rituals. Uh, the other important work which is emerging from this period is the rereading the literature. We need to reread the literature. Why? Because when the literature is being created, it has its own historical context. So we cannot borrow literature simply on its face value. We need to re-examine the way literature is being used. The classic work by Rama Srinivasan, The Many Lives of Rajput Queen, is very important in that sense. Renu Bahuguna has examined the portrayal of Rana Pratap. In what ways Rana Pratap has been appropriated gradually later on, and now they have become a symbol of something what they never been. So we need to contextualize the literature. What is important for me at this moment to discuss with you all is that the literature offers a very rich insight to the past. What is important for us to examine the literature in its historical context. We need to examine in the with exam, or rather contrast it with the larger traditions of literature of that area, of that era. Both, only then will be able to give a complex picture of the society of that society which is reflected in the literature. The Padmavat, as written by Jaisi, is written somewhere else. It's written in the Uttar Pradesh and written in the Avdi. Earlier, we used to ignore because it's written in Avdi, so it's not part of the Rajput tradition or the history of Rajasthan. But scholars like Rama Srinivasan have argued that we need to map the larger cultural thoughts, the larger literate, the circulation of literature across North India, and in what ways influences understanding or the cultural sensibilities of one region is reflected or is borrowed in other region. So we need to go beyond the region of Rajasthan to re-examine the literature of Rajasthan. What scholars like these are doing, they're arguing that the way literature is being retrieved in Bengal during the colonial period, how the understanding of the Bengali literature influences the understanding of the Rana Pratap, as Renu Bhoguna is trying to argue. What is important for us to understand, or what is importance of these works, is that the modern day understanding of a particular character or particular literature need not be the sole understanding of the character or the literature. There are nuanced transitions. There are complexities through which the literature has transformed itself of a particular character. So we need to examine those complexities in its historical context. Only then we will be in a position to locate it appropriately in its historical context. So works like Ramya Srinivasan is important in the sense also to challenge the stereotype which is being created for the communities or for the princes of Rajasthan. We need to understand the understanding of a later period is being imposed back for this region. Similarly, Janet Contrast, she has been trying to argue the literature available for the medieval Marwar region or the Maru region. And as a historians, we need to negotiate with these literature, examining its literary nuances, examining the literary significance, but at the same time, keeping an eye on the historical context in which it is being written. In what ways the larger Jain tradition is influencing the composition, or the composition of the tradition is being imposed on that, or in what ways the Sufi tradition is being imposed on the creation of a particular literary text, has to be examined. So there has to be a multi-layered reading of a text. Only then we'll be in a position to examine the significance of the literature. So there is a need to reread the literature in its historical context, which has been done extensively and very beautifully by scholars like Ramya Srinivasan, Renu Bhoguna, and Janet Contrast. Last but not the least, this is the area where I have worked. The beginning of the environmental history for Rajasthan can be definitely seen in the works like GSL Devla, who was trying to examine the expansion of desert in this area, or the expansion of desertification. He has extensively examined the Lakhi jungle, which is near Bhatinda region. In what ways Lakhi jungle is gradually disappearing because of the gradual disappearance of the rivers which were feeding it, or the Ghagra Hakka tradition, which was Ghaggar Hakra river tradition, which was feeding into the Laki jungle, is gradually being disseminated or gradually being depleted, leads to the elimination of Laki jungle. What is also important for us to realize that till the times Mughals came, the primary entry point to largest subcontinent of India was through Indian desert. The Punjab was not extensively used. Most of the movements in pre-Mughal period was from the Sindh and from the from the Rajasthan region. So there was a reason for that. And the Laki jungle played very important role in that transition. And the larger karma which was passing from this area also facilitated the movement of the military. So there's a larger understanding of environment which has to be weaved in if we want to examine the Rajasthan beyond Rajasthan. What GSL Devra has also examined is that we need to go beyond the modern confines of Rajasthan. We need to go to the Sindh region. We need to go to the Multan region. Only then we will be in a position to reflect back on the history of Rajasthan. The larger environment cannot be segregated in terms of modern day political boundaries of Rajasthan. We need to examine in the context of larger landscape extending up to the Afghanistan. And he has extensively documented that. He has also been trying to understand in what way salt making tradition has been important if you want to understand the Chauhan dynasty. The Chauhans, he is arguing, are basically Shaks, and there's a larger tradition of salt making visible in the Chauhans extending from Sambar region up to the region of Kutch. There is a whole set of Chauhan communities who are basically into salt making. Shaks are also in the salt making. So the larger history of the movement of the communities across in the subcontinent, way beyond the subcontinent, has to be understood. Only then the larger environmental history can be reconstructed. I'll not comment on my own work, which is primarily on the monsoon ecologies, understanding the centrality of monsoon if we want to examine the history of Rajasthan, or rather the history of Indian subcontinent. So we need to examine the functioning of monsoon. Let me almost conclude by highlighting the work of Abhimanyu Arha. He's at the moment teaching at Jaipur University. He was trying to argue the importance of fodder. In what ways fodder was very important for the sustenance of the empire. So it's not only agrarian production, rather the production of fodder was very important. I have not dealt this with earlier, but let me highlight or let me stress that when we examine the environmental history, we need not focus solely on history of forest and history of agriculture. There is a large part which is the grassland. So history of agriculture, history of grassland, history of wetlands, and then the history of forests. It's a combination of these. Only then will be in a position to examine the large historical tradition. We tend to ignore the importance of the grassland. We tend to ignore the importance of the wetlands. So scholars like Abhimanyu Ara, Devra Saab, and I have been trying to examine or integrate the significance of wetland, grassland, forest, and the green landscape to offer a comprehensive understanding of environmental history. We have not extended our work into the fauna, except Abhimanyu, who has worked on the cavalry. Divbhanu Singh Chawla, whom I mentioned earlier, has worked on the history of cheetah, and he has used painting as well as other evidences available from Rajasthan region. Paintings, I'll simply share a couple of paintings to make you realize the rich tradition of painting available from this region. This is painting shared by Nilanjan, one of my friend, Karsi Nilanjan. This is Raja Balwant Singh watching the rain clouds from the roof of his palace, painted by Nansuk of Guler, 1751. These are important sources for us to examine the nature and the environmental history and the statecraft and the complexities or interconnections of these systems to give us a complex and very rich understanding of early modern times. Thank you very much. This is the painting I was talking about, the Baramasa, where you have couplet at the top and the depiction of the nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayank, for a very, very brilliant, explanation of the history of Rajasthan. You spread a very wide net to encompass the entire gamut of the Rajasthan studies.
This is what you were asking for me.
Incorporating, myriads of palettes, with myriads of flavors of writings which have been done on Rajasthan, and I hope that everyone who has heard this lecture or is going to hear this lecture on the YouTube uh, would have, an entire gamut of knowledge, what to look for if he has to study the history of Rajasthan. You started with the primary source material, the type of sources, and then you made a thematic study of the secondary works. What are the various areas on which work has been done, along with the name of a large number of scholars who have actually contributed. Uh, as you rightly pointed out at the beginning of your talk, that in a lecture like this, it is almost next to impossible to name each and everyone who has worked on the field. That is next to impossible. But the way you explained, I think you have included even those who have contributed not much to the field, but have made weak attempts to enter into the field of Rajasthan. I mean, people like myself. I mean, by no stretch of imagination, I ever thought that my name would be occurring in the name of people who are working on Rajasthan.
Yeah, but you
Yes,
have
I
made a
have.
very important contribution.
Yes, I have made, but that means that your study was very, very thorough. Uh, well, uh, I have uh, one or two questions of mine, but before I put them up, I would request that a few questions which have been asked by the audience, first they may be taken up, and then I will put up my very weak questions on the topic.
I'll try my
Uh,
best to respond, sir.
uh, well, Masoom Billah asks, who created a unified province of Rajasthan? Akbar is generally the answer, whether it is correct or whether it is wrong.
Uh, Mausam Saab, this is what we are trying to challenge. These modern day understanding of Rajasthan or relationship between Mughals and Rajputana has to be challenged. Rajasthan is a very modern nomenclature. So equating Rajasthan with the Rajputana of Mughal period is a problematic proposition. uh, what is why it is important for us to challenge is that the work like Sunita Zaidi, who has worked on Sindh, and the Rajputs who are available or who are present in the other parts of India, like especially the work of the Clough. So, what is the name of the? Just a second. Give me a second. A scholar like Naukar, Sipahi, and give me a
Call,
second.
he's called.
Sorry, Kolf. Yeah,
Call.
Derek Kolf. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Derek called.
scholars like them have made us realize that the Rajputs are not solely confined in Rajasthan area. So equating Rajasthan and Rajput needs to be problematized and needs to be challenged. So I'll not say that Akbar gave it a modern nomenclature. What we are trying to suggest is that these princely states, initially with the Mughals, later on during the patronage of the Britishers, were able to offer us a rich historical literature through which we have been able to examine the early modern times. This kind of archival document or primary document is not available for any other part of the of Indian subcontinent. Confining them or reducing them only as a Rajput or Rajasthan will be a problematic because the boundaries keeps on changing. There's a complex understanding of the Vatan Jagir, the area which was given to the Amer, which is given to the Jodhpur, which is given to the Mewar, gradually or regularly shifted at the will of the Mughal Empire. The Khalsa land can be extended. Ajmer can take a part of the Mewar. Ajmer can take a part of the Sambhar. So, in what ways we are going to define Rajputana, Rajasthan, as well as the Mughal princely state, or the Mughal state and the princely states? The same problem extends when we examine the princely state, British Empire. When we got independence, there was a British India and then there was a princely states. Confining them to a one nomenclature will be a problematic proposition, and I'll not subscribe to this view. Unfortunately, I will not subscribe to this view.
Well, I would like to add to what Mayank replied. I would just point out to Masum Billah that look at the term Rajaputra, from which the name of the territory Rajputana ultimately came to exist. The term Rajaputra itself is a creation of around 8th to 10th or 11th centuries.
Yeah.
That was the time when this class of people started emerging. Hmm. Uh, Ultimately, they started concretizing as armed retainers, the Rajaputras, the sons of the small principalities or kings, the period when the so-called Indian feudalism was establishing itself in the Indian subcontinent. Later on, it was during the 16th century, almost at a time when the Lodi Empire was in doldrums and Babur was knocking at the doors of the country, that another thing happened, and that was these small Rajaputra, principalities or smaller areas now started, coming together and forming large zamidaris. So much so that by the time that Akbar's empire was established, we find Akbar's period sources like Arif Kandari and others
Yeah.
speaking about the Rajput zamidars, 500 or so of them. And, Arif Kandari and others talked about that if Akbar started fighting them, it would take around 200 or 300 years for him to, conquer all of them. And so the better policy would be that we should now have some sort of a policy to enter into some sort of a relationship. So definitely one thing is clear. I mean, I'm no expert of this field, but as per my understanding, the territory of Rajputana, what we now called as Rajputana, the term possibly started being used during the colonial period. Mayank, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, it's right.
You know, that whole concept of the territory started developing during the 15th, 16th centuries. Humayun, when he was facing, the Afghans from the region of Bihar or the onslaught of the Gujarati ruler from the side of Malwa, had also to contend with these so-called Rajput states who were, siding with the Gujarat ruler and
Yeah.
also making moves against Humayun. So possibly even before Akbar comes to the scene, there is some territory which such type of people getting established there. And by Akbar's time, this whole territory started, emerging as a powerful, states or divisions having military prowess. I'm not sure whether I have been able to explain what my understanding of the term is, but this is, I think, what I would answer to you. No, Rajputana has not been created by Akbar. It was a process which was independent of Akbar. But yes, the political, relationship, the coming of powers together of these chieftains with the Mughal emperors and their, coming into marriage alliances did help in their further development. And by British times, we have a powerful Rajputana state,
Yes.
which is there. I mean, this is what I would say. Next question is Lakshmi Kant Mishra. Interesting. Can you provide the trajectory of irrigational history and peasants as discussed by B.D. Chattopadhyay to that of situation during the 18th century?
Lakshmikant ji, very interesting question, but it cannot be responded as a question as a session. Let me share one of my article. The details. It was published in Medieval History Journal. It's a part of my book as well. Uh, what is important for us to realize that the history has changed. The irrigation history has changed. B.D. Chattopadhyay has worked on the what he has suggested is that the 8th 9th century we have evidence of Nadi Matrak to Dev Matrak, transition from Nadi Matrak to Dev Matrak. And while later on working on the same tradition and borrowing the works from the Nadim Sahab of the Kharin, is a small embankments in Jaisalmer region. What we have been able to argue, rather I have been argued, is that with the greater aridity increasing in that area, we see penetration of agriculture in the interiors of desert area. That is Jaisalmer area. Jaisalmer is settled. And the evidence comes from the study of B.D. Chattopadhyay, who says that now we are shifting from river-fed irrigation to rain-fed irrigation. And the whole method of rainwater harvesting, which is manifested in Kharin, is now becomes the dominant way of irrigation. So we are moving from river-fed irrigation to monsoon-fed irrigation or rain-fed irrigation, which is by the 18th century is the most dominant one. Jibril has worked on that. If you read the Muntonensi, the Vigat, then you get the evidence of various kinds of rain-fed irrigation. Behlos are there. There are small, Rela is there, which means the rainwater has come, which has spread over along land, which becomes fertile. And there's a complex community history also. The Paliwal Brahmins, who are primarily from Pali that is on the other side of the Aravalis, which must have witnessed the overflow of the rains, how they go to the Jaisalmer region and use the same technology which is available for the Pali region, for Jaisalmer region, and make Jaisalmer a very rich agricultural center for wheat production. So there's a very large complex history of transition from early period to 18th century. It's available in my work. It is available in the article published by the Medieval History Journal.
Thank you, Mayank, for this answer. I mean, in fact, during the course of my own surveys in the Jaisalmer region, in fact, when I was working on the Paliwal settlements of Jaisalmer region, I was able to locate around 27 khedas of the 84 khedas which are mentioned in the local sources. For example, there is Tawarikh Jaisalmer, which talks about 84 khedas. And even if today you go to Jaisalmer or Pokhran region, Sathalmer as it is known in the sources, you would be hearing about the 84 khedas of Palliwals.
Yes.
I have been able to trace only 27 or so which are mentioned in Tawarikh Jaisalmer, which is a 19th century work, 18th, 19th century work completed during the 19th century by one of the divans of the Jaisalmer state. And I have also tried to look at the surviving villages out there, and naturally now not all those 27 mentioned in Tawarikh Jaisalmer survive. Only 16, 17 or so physical remains of them survive. And along with them, at least 4 or 5 Kharins are also, in a working condition in present-day Jaisalmer district. For example, the Kharin near Khaba is very large, and you would find it that the area has been converted into a green land by the technology which these Palliwals brought to this region. That is something to be seen. I'm sorry, I digressed from that, but I just wanted to inform you that the technology which was used by the Palliwals is still extant, and you can still
Yeah.
see those big talaos which have been created with large number of orchards, fields, gardens, which still survive out there. Uh, any other question?
जस्ट सेकंड, लक्ष्मीकांत जी, मैंने दो किताबों के नाम और शेयर किए हैं। अनुपम मिश्र जी को कोई नहीं भूल सकता है अगर आपको इरिगेशन सिस्टम पढ़ना है,
जी।
राजस्थान की रजत बूंदें। और सेंटर फॉर साइंस एंड एनवायरनमेंट ने एक अच्छा कलेक्शन दिया था, डाइंग विजडम, सिटीजन्स रिपोर्ट वॉल्यूम 5। I have given the details in the chat box. You can copy it and use it. These are very extensive documentation of irrigation system of across India in Dying Wisdom, and for Rajasthan in the Anupam Mishra's Rajasthan ki Red Boondein.
Lashmi Kanji also asked, how did the nomads contribute to agrarian expansion?
Lakshmikant ji, very important question. Very, very important question. Unfortunately, the times we are living in has become agrarian. We don't realize that prior to industrial revolution, the primary source of energy was either humans or animals. The most intelligent form of energy resource was humans. That is why we have caste system. That is why we had the slavery. That is why we had the feudal mode of production. All these were mechanisms of controlling the human energy. This is important for agrarian production, for the state making, for the empire making. There's a very rich literature available on the history of the animals, the way camels were being used, the horses were being used, elephants were being used. Richard Bullier's classic work, The Camel and the Wheat. All these make you realize that the animals were very important component of human settlement. What we tend to ignore is that prior to the industrial revolution, horses was the most important source of communication and transportation. We cannot ignore the importance of banjaras for the transportation of goods. In my own childhood, Nadim Shah will appreciate that in our childhood, banjaras used to bring the salt to the our villages or to the our mohallas. So the nomadic communities had a very important role to play in the larger agrarian setup. The exchange of goods, the exchange of various kind of agriculture production was carried through these nomadic communities. The other thing which we need to realize is that the sedentary life is a later consideration or later development. The primary human tendency has been to nomadic, to move around. That is what I was trying to argue in the beginning. The modern day identification of Sisodias with Udaipur, Rathors with the Jodhpur, and the Kachwas with the Amir is problematic. All of them have come from somewhere else. They were migrating. So the movement was a very important consideration of the past. We tend to ignore and we tend to focus primarily on the agrarian settlements, and we presume that they have been here since time immemorial. No, nomadic or the migrations has been the dominant form of human sustenance.
Lakshmi Kanji, my knowledge about Rajasthan is very limited because I have confined my studies only to one part of it, that is Jaisalmer region, where I studied the Palliwal villages, especially one of the village, Kuldhara. But my reading suggests that even if you look at the Pallivals, you would probably be able to understand what was the contribution of the so-called nomadic tribes. And Pallivals also, just like the nomads, they were not nomads by no stretch of imagination, but they were migrants from the Pali region. They came and settled in Barmer, Pokhran, Jaisalmer, and they started establishing, a number of villages here and there. These settlements, villages would remain till water was available to them, and then they would migrate somewhere else. But if you look at the Vigat, you look at the Khayat, you look at the agrarian documents which survive from that region, you would come to understand that using their techniques, their knowledge, which they had brought from Pali region to this region, their villages became the areas where there was, दो फसलें होती थी. I mean, two crops were both, the crops of both the seasons, and one of most of the revenues were being collected from these areas, and then the products of these areas they would then transport via Baluchistan and Multan towards the northwest and also towards the other areas. So in a way, this mobile population at least in the area of Jaisalmer, contributed so much to the economic development that they came to be known as the Mitayers of the desert. In fact, there were claims that during the period of Akbar, they were one of the richest communities of that area. So much so that they had large number of gold coins which they had collected. This is not only a legend. In modern times, in fact, during one of my visits, when I was at this Pali village known as Kuldara, the moment we left the village, after half an hour or so, an American team with metal detectors, they reached the village, removed a few stones, and found, a hidden wealth of Akbari coins, gold and
Okay.
silver. Hmm. They were caught, that's another matter. But that gave credence to all those stories which were being circulated during the 19th century or written by Tawarikh-e-Jaisalmer, or are being sung by the Langania and Mangania communities in the Jaisalmer
Yeah.
region. If you go there, they are singing songs in praise of these Pallivals that they say that they had hoons and gold and silver which they would distribute to people. That got authenticated by a number of such discoveries from a small village known as Kuldhara. So in a way, these people who were migrating from one place to another, they were actually not nomadic class. They were not Banjaras. They came and settled here for a few centuries, but still, they were still mobile. They carried on trade up till Baluchistan and beyond, and they would go there and then return back. And they did contribute a lot so that many legends were circulated about them. So, if this is the case of a particular one village, one can imagine the situation all over the region of Rajasthan. Uh, Mayank, let me once again thank you for uh,
नदीम साहब, एक सेकेंड,
brilliant. Yeah.
थोड़ा मुगल अंपायर पे भी उनको बता दीजिए कि मुगल अंपायर अपने आप में कितना मोबाइल है और किस कदर वो यूज
Uh,
करता था.
Lakshmikant ji, actually, even the Mughal Empire was a peripatetic empire.
Yes.
Uh, you know, uh, Even their cities, their beautiful city like Fatehpur Sikri is nothing but a camp city transformed into stone. Uh, their whole life. I mean, there was not a single capital of the Mughals themselves. Migrating from one place to the other. Look at the evidence provided to us by the coins.
Yeah.
The coins would have legends. जहां पे भी एम्परर रहेगा उसको पुकारा जाएगा दारुल सल्तनत.
Yes.
अब वो चाहे आगरा में हो, चाहे गांव में हो, चाहे कहीं हो. ये
भाई,
हमने आपने आगरे को दारुल सल्तनत पुकार लिया, दूसरों को पुकार लिया, ज्यादातर वहां रहे थे. इवन गांव में भी जब वो सिक्का ढाला जाता था, जहां पे मुगल कैंप होता था, उसको भी दारुल सुरूर और दारुल सल्तनत फला जगह उसका नाम करके लिखते थे. एंड देयर इज so much information, but I would stop there, and that is a different discussion altogether, which needs a full topic, and inshallah at some point of time we may have a discussion on that. Mayank, you mentioned one thing which interested me, but also raised a few questions in my mind. You said valor was a response to the challenges of the colonial period, and their valorous stories and legends, type of legends, which we find from Rajasthan, quoted by Todd and others, are actually a response to the colonial allegations and whatnot. Right? That is, if I understood you correctly, which is quite plausible, and which appears to be quite correct. But then, why did not such stories of valor develop in other regions? Why are they confined only to the region of so-called Rajputana? These valorous stories are only confined, say, the neighborhood Gujarat. Hmm. It's a sort of a not only a hinterland, but the place which is connected with the ports, and most of the things are coming from there, and the type of people who live there, the merchants, they are also being they were one of the first to be subjugated, but no Belarus stories.
So
Uh,
Punjab
from the
Gorkhas,
Punjab.
they
So
have
that
their own tradition. It is the
uh,
Mughal British army, the way they were recruiting their army in response to it's if you one is interested, one can read Amar Farooqi,
yeah,
and then they work on work of Seema Alvi on the
yeah, yeah.
British army. It is the British quest for seeking the loyalty, which stress a particular characteristic of a particular community. So the
Hmm.
valorization was to seek legitimacy in the British administration or British army. So there is a whole
Okay,
tradition through which they were reinforcing their own lineage of a fighter.
right. Okay, okay, fine. My second query to you would be, I listened very keenly to the first part of your, lecture, where you dealt with a large number of documents. I have personally gone through Arsattas also. When I was working on the urban middle classes under the Mughals, Professor S.P. Gupta was alive. His book was there. His students, they were working under him. For example, one of his students, Sumbul Halim Khan,
Yeah, Halim.
ultimately wrote a book on Arsattas. Another type of documents, I think she has one or two books on which she had done her work. So during that period of time, these people being my contemporaries, I also started, when we sit together, so you look at the other people's documents and things. So I started looking at my own, information, whether it is there. Large number of Arsatta Imarti documents were found there. Arsatta Imarti documents give us much information regarding the prices of the building material, the wages which are being paid to the laborers and artisans and others working in the building industry department, so on and so forth. So a very rich source of information, and I think that even if one wants to work on only one type of documents from
Yeah.
Rajasthan or Satta, one can keep on writing a number of theses on that. So granted, and you did speak about them, but my question is that during my brief, intrusion into this field, I found that there are a large number of bilingual documents. Same document having Persian as well as the Rajasthani on the same paper. Hmm. So, would you like to say something regarding these bilingual documents, and when did this bilingualism end as far as Rajasthan were concerned? We had a lecture by Samira Sheikh a few weeks back on Gujarat, and she discussed the bilingual Gujarati documents. So I
Hmm.
became more interested to know. She also talked about bilingual epigraphs.
Yeah, there are.
And naturally, there are many bilingual, epigraphs in Rajasthan as well. Any comment on that? And when did this bilingualism end? If you can have some information.
I must confess, I will not be able to give you a very concrete answer when it end. But what is the bilingualism is an important manifestation of overlap of authority and the process of legitimization. You are if you recall Philip Wagner's work, when he says that I am Sultan among Hindu kings, the whole identification is in terms of the dominant power. So on the one hand, you are creating documents in your own vernacular language through which you are interacting, and then you are making it as a part of the larger tradition which you are copying from the Mughal empires. The other thing which I can, it's a simply guess. I'm not, I cannot say it with a very a conclusive argument or evidence that there are Parganas who were switching between Mughal Empire as their own territory and the territory of the ruler. The villages were given in pattas. At times they were taken it back from the ruler. So this transition of these local areas might have been a reason why they are being written in both the languages. The other thing is that perhaps I'm not a specialist on that. Perhaps Dilbag Singh is a better person to respond to that. The author who was writing that particular part of that Arsatta is more conversant with the language of that, perhaps in Persian or in the vernacular, because the evidences which are being collected is basically collated from the other kind of evidences. So I'm not very sure why it is being done, but definitely the extensive use of Persian is very much visible in all these areas. Not in terms of only the documents. I have been working on another manuscript, Tarikh-e Kilah Ranthambore. It's a part of the Hamir Kavya, written in Sanskrit, then Persian, then vernacular, then in Persian, converted back to once again vernacular, then in Urdu. So there is a whole gamut of this communication through various scripts. So there is a large tradition of overlap of scripts or understanding. And as you are the authority on that, the most of the literate section of the societies were well conversant with at least three languages. So perhaps it was not a barrier for them as it is barrier for us. We are not able to work with Persian as well as the Rajasthani simultaneously.
Right. I mean, in fact, I would just add to what you say that even today in Jaipur, in certain of the seminars, when I had gone there long, long back, decades ago, since around 15 years, I have not been to Jaipur. Before that, I had been there. And I was, made to understand that there are certain repositories with books which are written in Persian script, but are actually the Hindavi tongue. Uh,
Yes.
so there are large number of such documents. For example, Arth Kathanak has been found from Rajasthan itself. I
Ji.
mean, one of the very basic important information which gives us so much information about the Mughal society. Rajasthan, believe me, is much more than what Mayank has told
I
us.
agree. I agree.
There is much, much more. We would be, it's almost 2 hours, just 8 minutes to 2 hours. But still, there are two questions by Mirza Hasnain. Try to give very brief answer to that. The first question is on the Tong. Uh, uh, the history of Tong, the only Rohilla state in Rajasthan. Anything which you may be able to tell about that? And secondly, Hassan Aziz also asks your opinion about works of James Todd. Do answer
Uh,
this question.
For the first part, I'm not competent. I can simply suggest that the Tonk has a very rich archival documents, very rich literary. The Tonk Institute has a very rich Persian, Arabic, and Rajasthani manuscripts available with them. So scholars who are working on them can have access to the extensive documentation. I'm sorry, I cannot comment on that, except that Rima Huja's The Larger Work of History of Rajasthan talks about the history of Tonk. I'm sorry, I can't offer you a specific book on Tonk. There is one work I have read, but I can't recall the author's name. Uh, Perhaps Rima Huja's work will give you further bibliography to understand the history of Tonk.
I think Rima Ahuja's work is the best to understand, and then
Yes.
from there you can get other references where to look for Hassan Aziz. I think you should look at Rima Ahuja's work.
Yes.
As far as Todd is concerned, naturally, he is one of the greatest historians of Rajasthan. Uh, but sorry to say that he also is similar to what Eliot and Dawson tried to do with Indian history. Todd tried to do with the history of Rajasthan. He is someone whom you cannot ignore, but someone who can easily mislead you and make you join the party of Modi ji.
Rudolph and Rudolph have a book on the they have critically examined toad. So anybody is interested can read Rudolph and Rudolph. It's published by Oxford University Press. I had reviewed that manuscript. It's published. Perhaps Romanticism of Toad was the title of the Rudolph's book. So if you're interested in critically examining toad, you can read that. Norman Ziegler has critically engaged with that, and we all have been trying to critically engage with the toad.
Well, I think we should end there. There are a number of questions which are still being asked. Which are the languages, court languages? I don't know whether this concept was.
It differs from principality to principality. Dunani, Marwadi, Mewari, Mewati. So there is no one. It is modern understanding of uniform language. So it keeps on changing. But when these principalities are engaging with the Mughal Empire, they are using Persian as a source of communication. So this
Uh,
singular identification of a court language is a problematic proposition.
Problematic.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
problematic.
So
And
with these,
then
I think I mean Nilanjan also has a number of things to say. Nilanjan Sarkar, but I think we can deliberate on them later on. Much time has gone by. I must thank one last time Mayank Kumar for being with us today. It has been an exhaustive evening, but an evening where at least I learned a lot. I would just say that uh, Asha Aligarh Society of History and Archaeology, as well as Ganga Jamni Heritage, would keep on bringing such lectures to you for a few more weeks. Our interest is that the history of our past, especially of the contested medieval period, should be presented to the masses and to our students in a language in which they can easily understand. And that is what we have been doing for the last 7 months, twice a week, sometimes discussing the sources themselves. For example, today we looked at very exhaustively at the type of source material, both primary and secondary, for history of Rajasthan, the Rajasthani sources. We had a lecture before a few weeks before on the Dutch sources.
yeah.
We had lectures on individual source materials. There are many more on which we can discuss. We are going to, in future, one of our programs, we would be dealing with Mughal miniatures also, how they act as a source of history, what type of information. Our only attempt at these lectures is that please open your minds, and with open minds, read the sources and try to understand our past. That is the only attempt which we are going to make. So I hope that all of you would be joining us for more such interesting lectures in the coming weeks. We will meet you once again on Friday, same time, same place. Goodbye, good night. Thank you very much.
Shukriya Nadeem Saab and Shukriya Asha for creating